A foggy Sunday morning follows a long night of St. Paddy's Day drinking in Boston. As our security guard arrives to clock on for her morning shift, she's surprised to see the maintenance worker stuck outside the building. He arrived 40 minutes earlier and hasn't been able to make any contact with the night shift guards still inside. The pair spend another half an hour rapping on windows trying to peer in before finally deciding to call the security supervisor. The year is 1990 and the nearest phone is all the way down the street at the local university. 10 minutes later, the supervisor arrives, unlocks the door, and the view that greets them confirms what no one wanted to say out loud. A crowbar leans against the wall, the cameras are turned, a jimmied coat hanger and fragments of wood are scattered across the floor. This is the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum, and over $1 billion worth of art has just vanished in the most successful art heist of all time. It's just before midnight and Randy is running late. He wasn't supposed to work tonight. He wasn't even the first asked to cover this last-minute shift change. But he's happy to fill in. The night shift pays better and he can pass the time practicing his trombone. Once buzzed inside, Rick, his partner for the evening watch, greets him, and together they wave goodbye to the afternoon shift guards. The doors lock behind them, leaving the pair alone to face what's to come. While Randy heads downstairs to get changed, Rick moves to the security desk. It's a state-of-the-art facility equipped with 4 CCTVs and a single panic button. In truth, the Gardner Museum was losing money so quickly by the 80s, they hadn't even kept up with basic maintenance. Luxuries like insurance or the security review recommendations from 2 years earlier simply weren't realistic. Guards like Randy weren't thinking of thieves, they were looking for leaks in a pitch-black, fog-filled maze with no ventilation, let alone lasers. At midnight, Randy takes over the watch desk and Rick climbs the stairs to start his first round, working his way down the 3 main levels. It's a simple enough routine. Randy can monitor the progress with the motion detector readout in front of him, while Rick confirms the time he enters each room with a magnetic swipe card. It takes about 30 minutes, and Rick returns to the watch desk, ready for round 2. But he only gets halfway through before Randy spots something odd. An alarm sounded in the Conservators Lab on the 4th floor. He radios Rick to check it out. The Conservators Lab isn't part of the public galleries. That's where delicate restorations take place. And on this night, 3 paintings that typically hung in the Blue Room Gallery are all being treated here. Rick radioed back, nothing unusual. But just 10 minutes later, a fire alarm sounds from the carriage house, the connected residence that until 6 months earlier was home to the museum director. Seeing no fire, Rick disables the alarm. This is more excitement than Randy was expecting, but Rick reassures him that the lab alarm goes off all the time. Although, yeah, the fire alarm, that was unusual. They swap roles and Randy heads off to start his first round at 1 a.m. He's making his way back down to the first floor when Rick radios him a simple message.
Randy, will you please come to the desk?
In just a few seconds' time, Randy turns the corner and discovers they're no longer alone in this building. Police have responded to the fire alarm. That's Randy's first thought, but his jaw drops as one of them begins to cuff Rick, claiming to recognize him from a warrant. He's shocked, but it tracks, and he doesn't doubt for a second that these truly are Boston PD. Rick must have done something wrong. It's not until Randy finds himself, too, being cuffed that the confusion truly sets in. Why are we being arrested? It's only when the duct tape comes up to cover his eyes do one of the strangers calmly state, "This is a robbery," and everything makes sense. Randy is terrified. The 2 guards are split up and guided to opposite ends of the basement. Here, curled up on the floor, handcuffed under a sink, Randy just wants the intruders to get their job done and go. He spends the next 8 hours coming to accept the one way he sees this night ending. Mozart's Requiem floods into his mind, drowning out sounds like a cart and what he thinks must be more than 2 people moving around upstairs. When the real Boston PD arrive the next morning, it takes them almost half an hour to finally locate Randy, who's still so terrified he thought the thieves were coming back to finish him off. Rick is found nearby, but seems calm enough to remain in his bindings until the police photographer can arrive. In their search, Boston PD noticed the makeshift security room behind the watch desk has been smashed open. The CCTV footage is missing, as is the printed readouts from the motion detector. Clearly, the intruders knew what they were doing. But this is 1990. They didn't think to look for the backup on floppy disk. Investigators could at least get a rough idea of where the thieves went and when. Everything lined up with what Randy had described, until 1 a.m. when he started his rounds. While Randy was on the 3rd floor, the side door next to the watch desk had been opened and closed. This door can only be opened from the inside, which Rick admits was him. But he says it was part of his routine to check that the door alarm was working. 10 minutes later, the door is opened again, which again Rick confirms was when he let the police in. He'd seen them park and approach the door through the CCTV, then they buzzed the intercom and claimed to be investigating a disturbance on the museum grounds. The time reads 1:24 a.m. Randy is radioed down and soon cuffed in the basement, and the motion detectors sense nothing for the next 24 minutes, more than twice the length of a typical art heist. While they were later tested and determined to be working as intended, guards had reported the motion detectors as unreliable, and Rick himself would boast about being able to duck walk through a room without setting off the alarm. Infrared sensors at the time were triggered by sudden changes in heat. Slow changes wouldn't always register, and in foggy conditions, they could either fail to detect anything or fire off false positives. But at 1:48, movement kicks off in the Dutch room, where police learn 6 pieces are now missing. A proximity alarm is shattered, and a secret door left swung half open. These weren't all small artworks easily removed, the Rembrandts having to be haphazardly cut from their frames. At 1:51, movement heads to the short gallery, where some smaller sketches are taken and signs point to an abandoned attempt to remove the Napoleonic flag, but only its eagle finial was actually taken, ripped from its perch. Movement continues between these two galleries for the next 35 minutes. Back in the Dutch room, the thieves discover not all paintings come on canvas, Rembrandt's self-portrait being a 3-foot-tall piece of solid wood, and the landscape with an obelisk not that much smaller. Nothing is proving very easy to handle, even the least valuable item in the room putting up quite a fight as they forcibly rip the Chinese coup from its base. For the next 12 minutes, the motion detectors fail to pick up anything once more, until 2:41, when the inside door followed by the outside door opens, and once more at 2:45, the inside door followed by the outside. And just like that, in 81 minutes, nearly 10 times longer than typical for art heists, they were gone. This sequence of events raised more questions than answers. On the security director's seat lay the frame of Chez Tortoni, which came from the Blue Room. But the only time motion was detected in the Blue Room was during Rick's rounds. Randy never even made it that far. And Rick's story of opening the door to check the alarm as his routine, well, the supervisors never saw that on their daily review of the night logs. And the CCTV footage that remained of the 6 nights before the theft couldn't support his claim either. What is shown on those tapes, however, is Rick letting in someone else, his off-duty supervisor, at 1 a.m. the night before the robbery. Things aren't adding up. Rick said he saw the police car approach on the CCTV, but some students had already spotted the car with cops inside parked in that same spot 20 minutes earlier. This mystery was in need of a proper investigation. But this is 1990. Forensics is in its infancy, so after dusting for fingerprints, finding no tire treads, no cigarette stubs, nor even a convenient ID left behind, the FBI had exhausted all possibilities. They were out of evidence. They even lost the duct tape. It was time for what never failed. The usual suspects, some gut instinct, and a couple of psychics. At this time, the FBI has no art theft team. Rather, the Boston branch is waist deep in an all-hands effort to bring down La Cosa Nostra, the mafia, which had been tangled in their own leadership battles for years at this point. To be the agent finding a painting whilst everyone else is catching killers wouldn't have the same impact come promotion time, let alone in making the front page. The 40 agents initially working on the case soon were reassigned, leaving the short straw with a 26-year-old rookie who'd had the good fortune of previously solving an art case. When it came to solving a crime, the FBI and the state police had very similar strategies. Who did they already know who had done the same crime before? These thieves used exotic tools such as duct tape, handcuffs, and even a false moustache. Investigators asked themselves, were there any criminals out there with that same level of ingenuity? Over 300 people are tracked down and interviewed. One guard reported a construction supervisor who forced his way into the security room for 10 minutes shortly before the theft. Other guards were overheard by Boston PD gossiping about Oriental persons, taking photos of the motion detectors, and even hanging around the guards' own homes. State police were keen on a con man who failed at stealing some art years earlier, while Boston's most infamous art thief was already in prison. Everyone was suspect. Even the recently ousted museum director, in the midst of a divorce, had a number of odd behaviours reported by his wife. And not to be forgotten, Isabel Stewart Gardner's ghost herself was able to lend a hand thanks to one of the psychics brought in by the FBI, who was able to reveal that the paintings never left the museum and were being hidden in the ceiling. Unfortunately, they must have been moved before the investigators found the ladder. Fingers start pointing all over, and many of the FBI's land back on the mafia. But they're not the only ones. Art detectives from Scotland Yard suspect the IRA, likely by way of crime lord Whitey Bulger, a pivotal member of Boston's organised crime that for the FBI is a key informant they've become so dependent upon that even murder charges have been squashed to keep him in play. No, the FBI have their eyes elsewhere. One at a time, the investigation shines a focused light on everyone on the FBI's radar, only to see them die, turn informant, or implicate themselves in another crime that the FBI could charge them with, and then have returning the artwork dangled over their heads as a get-out-of-jail-free card. Alas, no one cashed it in. Until an anonymous letter sent to Museum Director Hawley in 1994 finally demanded a ransom for the painting, proving itself credible by disclosing information unknown to the public at that time. Attention was then drawn to one of that infamous art thief's associates, who showed what is now considered most likely a fake to a reporter, in addition to handing over some paint flakes that, although proved not of the painting he first claimed, did match accurately for the time period and material used by the most valuable of the missing pieces. But by this time, the FBI had completely lost faith in this suspect's ever-evolving stories of Yakuza and wealthy benefactors, so they refused to deal with him any further. But the FBI did take the Japan possibility seriously and were able to execute the first ever American search warrant on Japanese soil in the name of the Gardner art. Unfortunately, they only found a fake. Every time the artwork seemed at hand, it slipped right through their fingers. Were any of these theories ever on the right trail? Well, with the witnesses regathered, there are some faces that stand out to them. One of the students who spotted the thieves before the heist now identifies the driver as David Turner, one of the only suspects left alive and free 30 years later, a face on which Rick had agreed. Whereas Randy, who would refuse to identify anyone or speak publicly for decades out of fear, more recently put his confidence behind a different face, the con man that state police first suspected. He's positive that that's who cuffed him and that it's the only one of the known suspects' faces that he recognizes, neither of which lines up with the FBI's most modern version of events. In 2013, 2 months before the retirement of the then head of FBI Boston, the FBI announces they've solved the case. They know who did it, but won't name the suspects. Furthermore, they know where the art is. Well, was, probably, but not right now. They'll keep looking. As of 2024, a $10 million reward still stands for the return of all the artwork in good condition, which they will happily divide up for individual pieces, the finial even coming with a bonus $100,000, which is higher than the value of the eagle itself. So why hasn't anything been returned? According to criminal attorneys, the FBI's tactics, whilst effective for arrests, have disintegrated any trust amongst criminals who may want to come forward, because so many who have made motions to return the art are then surveilled and arrested for something else before the deal is final. And perhaps in this way for the FBI, the art may be more helpful if it remains missing as a tool for warrants and raids that help them to solve more violent crimes. What may have been the closest the FBI ever came to a recovery was with an undercover FBI agent who had traced some of the art to France, but the FBI supervisor at the time insisted on personally participating in the raid on French soil, fully armed and everything, which even the French authorities weren't permitted to do. So the supervisor removed the undercover agent from the case, cancelled the operation, and wrote a heated memo to FBI headquarters claiming the agent was trying to claim the reward money for himself, which was deemed such a bizarre and unacceptable version of events that the memo was forcibly withdrawn, and the chance of recovery just disappeared. So stepping away from the FBI's version of events, where is the art? Where does everyone else believe it hides? Scotland Yard and European investigators strongly believe it's with the IRA, as do rumours within some of the IRA cells themselves. The Yakuza angle is perhaps the least explored, as Japanese civil code makes reclaiming stolen goods nearly impossible if they've been purchased in good faith and held onto for a number of years. Amongst Boston's underworld, however, the resonating theory is the most upsetting, that they've been destroyed, either through incompetence or, more likely, through fear. The museum, however, lives on in hope. The picture frame still hanging in remembrance, not because of Gardner's will as many claim, but as a message to the public that only one thing can hang in the spot marked by an empty frame, the same painting that was once there. And so the reward stands, not to turn the hearts of criminals, but to keep the artwork itself in the public eye, so that even a generation removed, someone, somewhere, could look up from their phone and recognize what's been hiding in plain sight all these years.